10. Mystery of the Merovingians. The tale of France's birth as a nation begins in the dim, rain-lashed forests where the Frankish tribes roamed, restless and wild, until they were gathered under the iron hand of Clovis I, first to bear the crown of united power. His dynasty, the Merovingians, draws its name from the shadowy figure of Merovech, being more myth than man, whose origins are lost in the murk of legend and time. Merovech, it is said, fought alongside the Romans against the savage onslaught of the Huns. But beyond this, history is silent, leaving only the echo of his name to stir the imagination. Merovech, so the tale goes, was born not of earthly lineage, but of the sea itself. In the 7th century chronicle of Fredegar, we find a curious tale, a strange and spectral figure named Clodio, who with his wife sought solace by the shore one summer. There, amidst the salt and spray, his wife, while swimming in the deep waters, was set upon by a creature of the abyss, a Kinotaur, half beast, half demon, who forced itself upon her. From this union of water and horror was born Merovech, a child not of man, but of the brine and the monstrous. Yet, this is but one strand of the legend's tangled web. In the winding corridors of more modern myth, this tale intertwines with another, spun by the hands of pseudo-historians in the pages of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, and later by Dan Brown in his Da Vinci Code. Here, Merovech's bloodline is said to flow not from the sea, but from the most sacred blood of all, that of Jesus Christ. Mary Magdalene, they say, was his wife, fleeing the Holy Land with the unborn child of the divine, taking refuge in the sun-drenched shores of Marseille. The Holy Grail, they whisper, is not a chalice, but her womb, the vessel of Christ's bloodline, and from it the Merovingians sprung forth, kings not by conquest, but by divine right. This tale has taken root in the minds of many, though it stands on shaky ground, with no proof but the fervor of belief. Some, lost in the labyrinth of their own theories, weave even stranger fables, tracing Merovech's lineage back to the Nephilim, the fallen angels of ancient times, tying the sea beast that fathered him to the beast and antichrist of Revelation's grim prophecy. Yet, beneath these layers of myth and mystery, there may lie a simpler truth, one less grand, more human. Perhaps Merovech was born not of gods or monsters, from the union of a man and a woman, its father unknown, his birth shrouded in secrecy. The tale of the sea beast, then, a convenient fiction, spun to obscure his illegitimacy, cloak his origins in the mist of the divine, and to grant his descendants the aura of the heroic and the sacred, a tale befitting the founders of a dynasty. 9. The death of St. Louis. Louis X, 1214 to 1270, figure enshrined in the annals of piety and warfare, bears the singular distinction of being the only French king canonized as a saint. Yet, his saintly glow is marred by the twin calamities of the 7th and 8th Crusades, ventures that draped him not in the laurels of victory, but in the shadow of defeat. On the blistering sands of Egypt, in his inaugural crusade, the valiant king found himself ensnared by enemy hands, shackles of captivity, and the weight of ransom crushing the dreams of a holy triumph. His final campaign led him to Tunis, where death, like a specter, hovered over his men, dealing a harvest of agonizing end. History, with its cold ink and unfeeling pen, attributes Louis's demise to the relentless hand of plague. Yet in 2019, the murmurings of time were disrupted, and the scrolls of yore trembled at the revelation that the king's death might have sprung from a different malady altogether. A jawbone, ancient and brittle as the truths it concealed, revealed a tale of scurvy, an insidious foe born of neglect and ignorance. The cursed lack of vitamin C gnawed at the king's flesh, leaving his gums raw, his teeth loosened from their moorings, as if his very body had begun to unravel. This grim spectacle was not Louis's burden alone, for 1/6 of his valiant host suffered in kind, their torment vividly chronicled by John de Joinville, who spoke of necrotizing gums and the barber's grim work, slicing away dead flesh so that the soldiers might yet chew and swallow. The camp resounded with the cries of men, their voices raw and broken, echoes of pain cutting through the silence like the wails of women in the throes of childbirth. But why, in the fecund lands of Tunisia, where fruits and vegetables lay ripe for the plucking, did the Crusaders succumb so terribly? The answer lies in the dark corridors of ignorance. The malady that scourged them had not yet been named, for it was only in 1927 that the link between vitamin C and scurvy was fully understood. The Crusaders, stubborn in their traditions, clung to a diet heavy in flesh, their stores barren of the sustenance needed to fend off this creeping scourge. Poor planning and the arrogance of ignorance conspired against them, and their bodies withered under the weight of their own folly. Moreover, Louis, ever the pious soul, undertaken penances and fasts, acts of devotion that sapped his strength and left him vulnerable. Dysentery, too, clawed at him, weakening his resolve as death circled closer. Scurvy, though not the final blow, pried open the gates of his defenses, allowing the unseen infection to slip through and claim its royal prey. Thus, the saintly king, who had sought to carve his name in the flesh of the Holy Land, found himself carved into by death. A martyr, not of war, but of the cruel ironies of life. 8. Charles VI's Glass Delusion. In the labyrinthine annals of history, there unfurls a curious and fragile tale of shimmering delusions that plagued the minds of the noble and the mighty, from the shadowed recesses of the Middle Ages through the tapestried corridors of subsequent centuries, only to vanish into the mists of the 19th century. This peculiar affliction, known as the glass delusion, cast a spectral shadow over those it claimed, bending their perceptions until they believed their very flesh and bone had transmuted into brittle glass, delicate as frost on a winter morning. One of the earliest recorded sufferers of this translucent madness was none other than King Charles VI of France, born in 1368, a monarch who, in his youth, seemed destined to illuminate his realm with the brilliance of an enlightened rule. Indeed, he began his reign with the fervor of a young son, reforming the royal bureaucracy with a hand both deft and wise. Yet, the fates are cruel weavers, and in the year 1392, the threads of his sanity began to unravel. What had once been a mind celebrated as the beloved turned inward upon itself, spiraling into the dark chasm where madness dwells. The court whispered of his strange new conviction, but his body was fashioned entirely of glass, as though the very essence of his being had been transmuted into something as fragile and cold as the windows of a cathedral. To safeguard his brittle form, Charles swaddled himself in layers of thick, heavy blankets, cooned against a world of shattering dangers. Motionless he remained, a statue of woven fabric, fearing that the slightest movement might fracture him into 1,000 glittering shards. And when the demands of kingship forced him to rise, he did so clad in a peculiar garment, stiffened with iron rods, a grotesque exoskeleton meant to shield his imagined fragility. The king, who once gazed upon his people with the warmth of a ruler, now saw them as phantoms, unable to recognize even his own wife and children. He languished in this state of deranged delicacy for months, retreating from the cleansing waters as though they, too, might erode his glassy form. It was only centuries later, in the year 2018, that a conclave of modern minds would diagnose his condition through the lens of bipolar disorder, term unknown in the shadowed halls where he had once ruled. Some scholars, peering through the prism of time, have speculated that this glass delusion was not merely a madness of the mind, but a reflection, subconscious and profound, of the age's own anxieties. For it was in the 15th century that the alchemists of Venice first conjured forth glass of such purity, such colorless transparency, that it seemed a material born not of the earth, but of dreams. Before this age of glass, there had been those who believed themselves to be fashioned from clay, earthenware men who feared the kiln's embrace. And in the 19th century, as concrete rose like gray monoliths from the ground, a new breed of the afflicted emerged, the concrete men, who trembled at the thought, their own solidity. Thus, the glass delusion stands as a haunting testament to the human mind's capacity for transformation and terror, a crystalline mirror to the fears and fascinations of an ever-changing world. 7. The Murder of Agnes Sorel. In the tangled skein of French history, there glimmers the strange and tragic figure of Agnes Sorel, creature of radiant beauty and swift, cunning wit. She was but 20 years of age when her path crossed that of King Charles VII, a monarch weighted with years and the burdens of a troubled crown. 20 summers her senior, yet he was ensnared as a moth in the brilliance of her flame. king, bewitched and beguiled, did not keep her in the shadows as was the wont of kings with their mistresses, but rather flaunted her with the audacity of a man intoxicated by youth. Agnes was not merely his lover, she was the first in France to be declared so openly, a title adorned with the ostentation of rubies and gold. Charles, in his infatuation, heaped upon her all that his kingdom could muster. Among these treasures was what many believed to be the first cut diamond, a jewel whose facets captured light in the same way Agnes ensnared the hearts of men. She was no meek recipient of these gifts, but a creature of extravagance, draped in furs and silks that trailed behind her like the very shadow of ambition. Her gowns, scandalous in their design, revealed more than mere flesh. They exposed a woman who understood power and how to wield it. Her pale breast, a defiant emblem of her dominance over the king's heart. In the labyrinthine corridors of power, Agnes's influence was not merely ornamental. She whispered into the ear of Charles, and those whispers carried the weight of nations. It was she who urged him to wrest Normandy from the clutches of the English. Counsel as sharp and gleaming as the diamond she wore. The king, in his thrall, even legitimized the 3 children she bore him. Bastards no longer but pawns in the great game of thrones. Yet, in her ascent, she garnered enemies, creatures of jealousy and spite who slithered through the court, fangs bared. Then, in the chill of February 1450, after birthing a 4th child, Agnes was struck down by a malady most foul. Diarrhea unrelenting, river of death coursing through her veins. Within days she lay cold and still, a mere 28 years on this earth, her life extinguished as suddenly as it had burned bright. Whispers of poison drifted through the court, as subtle and deadly as the mercury that had seeped into her flesh. It was not until centuries later, in the cold light of forensic science, truth was unearthed. Truth that only deepened the mystery. Jacques Coeur, the royal financier, was the first to bear the weight of suspicion. But Agnes had been his patron, and his guilt dissolved like shadows at dawn. Others pointed to Queen Marie, the spurned wife, or to Agnes's own cousin, the scheming Antoinette de Maignalet. But the most compelling figure in this gallery of rogues was Louis, King's own son, a man whose hatred for Agnes was as palpable as the blade he once brandished against her. His spies, serpents in human guise, slithered through her chambers, their hands ready to do his bidding. Yet, the truth remains elusive, shrouded in the mists of time. The murder of Agnes Sorel is a tale half told, a mystery that teases the minds of historians, like a riddle whose answer lies just beyond reach. The cold case of her death lingers, unresolved, in the annals of history. Dark enigma that will forever beckon those who seek to untangle the threads of her life and death. 6. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Catherine de Medici, that oft-damned wraith of the French court, stands enshrined in the annals of history as a figure of shadowy infamy. A serpent queen, they called her, with venomous cunning poised to strike from the folds of darkness. A coiled menace, ever lurking behind the veils of her 3 sons' fragile reigns. This image, woven with the threads of intrigue and suspicion, portrays her as the sinister architect of France's labyrinthine wars of religion, a time when the nation teetered on the edge of chaos. Yet, beneath the poisoned whispers and grim accusations, one finds a woman acutely aware of the fragile peace that balanced on the blade's edge between the Protestant Huguenots and the devout Catholics. Catherine, with a mind as intricate as the most delicate of tapestries, sought to weave together these torn factions. In her pursuit of this fragile unity, she turned her gaze toward Jeanne d'Albret, the formidable Protestant Queen of Navarre, widow of the Huguenot champion Antoine de Bourbon. With careful hands, she crafted the proposal of a marriage, a union between Jeanne's son, Henri, and her own daughter, Margaret. Thread of hope spun amidst the gathering storm. But Jeanne, ever wary, perceived the serpent's glint beneath Catherine's silken words. In her letters, she confided to Henry, her son, the bitter taste of deceit. I have spoken to the queen 3 or 4 times. She only mocks me and reports the contrary of what I have said to her. Yet, despite her misgivings, Jeanne relented. The match agreed upon. Soon after, while in Paris, Jeanne was struck down by death's sudden hand, and the city's air thickened with whispers of murder. Poisoned gloves, they murmured. Serpent Queen's latest weapon of choice, though no proof could ever bind the accusation to truth. On the appointed day, August 18, 1572, Henry and Margaret were wed. The streets of Paris swelled with Huguenots come to celebrate, unaware of the malevolence brewing beneath the surface. Then came the fateful day of August 22nd, when Gaspard de Coligny, the Huguenot leader, was gravely wounded by an assassin's blow. Fear festered among the Catholics, and in the pre-dawn shadows of August 24th, St. Bartholomew's Day, the streets ran red as thousands of Protestants were slaughtered in a frenzy of violence. Paris itself transformed into a grim charnel house. History, with its merciless quill, has painted Catherine as the dark architect of this massacre, a fiend who orchestrated the carnage from the safety of her chambers. But can such a portrait be truly accurate? It is known that Catherine was aware of the plot to kill Coligny, perhaps even sanctioned it to shield her son, King Charles IX, from the Huguenot threat. Yet, to claim that she meticulously planned the wholesale butchery of her enemies lacks the weight of truth. In the aftermath, Catherine visited the wounded Coligny, a gesture of supposed concern, sending her royal doctor to tend to him, and offering sanctuary to those Protestants fleeing the murderous mobs. Why would she, the alleged mastermind, move to halt the bloodshed that would inevitably plunge France into yet another war? The very union of Henry and Margaret had been intended to forge peace, not shatter it. Catherine's own words, trembling with the rawness of unexpected terror, hint at a woman caught unawares by the ferocity of events. I have never before been in a situation where I had so great a reason for feeling terrified and from which I have escaped with greater gratitude. Her son, the unstable Charles IX, in the throes of hysteria, had cried, "Kill them all!" And in that moment, perhaps Catherine found herself not the manipulator, but the manipulated, forced to navigate the bloody tide that surged beyond her control. 5. Henry IV's missing head? In the dim glow of history's flickering candle, the figure of Henry of Navarre looms, a man whose destiny twisted with the tides of fortune, ascending to the throne as Henry IV after the bloodied end of Catherine's last son, ill-fated Henry III, in that fateful year of 1587. It was said that upon the cusp of power, when the crown seemed a thorned promise, he uttered with a wry smile, "Paris is well worth a mass." Thus, with a pragmatist's flourish, he bent his knee to Roman Catholicism, a gesture intended to staunch the bleeding wounds of a nation riven by ceaseless religious strife. As the first of the Bourbon line to sit upon France's throne, he was embraced as Good King Henry, the healer of a fractured realm, a sovereign who, with gentle hands, wove threads of peace and prosperity into the fabric of a once tattered land. Yet, as time turned its relentless wheel, the sweet perfume of his legacy curdled into the stench of decay. By 1793, the Bourbons, those once revered architects of order, were scorned as the harbingers of France's undoing, their name cursed in the fervent whispers of revolution. In a fevered frenzy, a mob of the dispossessed and the disillusioned descended upon the Basilica of Saint Denis, the sanctified resting place of kings, where Henry's body had lain since the sanguine year of 1610. There, in a grotesque parody of justice, they tore his bones from the earth, casting them with a madman's glee into the anonymous void of a mass grave. And when, years later, in 1817, that grave was reopened, the bones of kings laid bare beneath the skies, Henry's head was nowhere to be found. The mystery deepened in 1946 when a shadowy figure, a photographer of dubious repute, presented the Louvre with a head, mummified and ghostly, that he claimed bore the visage of the lost king. The Louvre, with a dismissive wave, declined the offer. Yet the head, like a specter, refused to vanish. In 2008, it re-emerged from the dusty attic of a retired tax collector, Jacques Belanger, in the quiet town of Angers. Here, modernity's tools, facial reconstruction software, were called upon to peel back the veil of time. And lo, the ghostly head bore an uncanny resemblance to portraits of the once beloved king. A mole here, a scar there, whispering secrets of a royal past. But doubts gnawed at the edges of certainty. Why, if this were truly the head of Henry, had the embalmers of yore failed in their sacred duty, leaving the brain, now shriveled to the size of a walnut, untouched within its bony cradle? DNA, that modern oracle, spoke in riddles, matching the head to blood purportedly belonging to Louis XVI. But the blood, like all relics of the past, was tainted by uncertainty, and the final stroke, comparison of DNA with living Bourbon descendants, seemed to sever the fragile thread, suggesting that neither the head nor the blood belonged to the storied lineage. And so the riddle remains. Where lies the head of Henry IV? Did the revolutionaries, in a rare act of reverence, secrete his body away, granting it the dignity they denied so many others? Or does he lie, whole and untroubled, in a hidden grave, untouched by the chaos that swept his kingdom? The truth, like the king's head, remains elusive, perhaps resting still in some forgotten corner of the earth, waiting for the day when its secrets will be unearthed. For the mistress and the witch. In the shadowy labyrinth of 17th-century Paris, where secrets festered in the dim recesses of high society, there emerged a woman known to the world as Catherine Monvoisin, though history would remember her as La Voisin. A figure both revered and reviled, she moved with the grace of one who knows too much, her knowledge vast and uncanny. Educated far beyond what was common for her sex and station, she wielded her understanding of medicine and the human form like a sharp blade, cutting through the veils of mystery that shrouded the lives of her clients. Her hands, delicate yet deadly, traced the lines of fate in palms and faces, while her knowledge of forbidden arts brought forth the hidden desires of those who sought her. In the dim confines of her chamber, filled with the pungent scent of herbs and the sharp tang of iron, La Voisin concocted potions that whispered of desire and death. Among these, her aphrodisiacs were the most sought after. A macabre melange of ground toad bones, the fiery essence of Spanish fly, the warmth of human blood, and the cold metallic taste of iron shaving. Such was the potency of her brews that even the learned men of the Sorbonne, those pillars of knowledge and reason, were beguiled into believing that her powers were divine in origin, a gift bestowed by the heavens rather than the pits of hell. But there was more to La Voisin than potions and prophecies. Beneath her placid exterior lay a soul steeped in the darkness of her own making. She ventured into realms where others dared not tread, conducting rites that chilled the blood and corrupted the soul. The Black Mass, that most blasphemous of ceremonies, became her domain. Here, in a perverse inversion of sanctity, she offered her own body as a living altar, a vessel through which the spirits of the abyss were summoned. It was not long before the tendrils of her influence reached the gilded halls of Versailles, where the powerful and the desperate alike sought her counsel. Among them was the infamous Madame de Montespan, the king's favored mistress, who, in 1667, came to La Voisin with a request that would seal both their fates. Desiring to secure her hold on Louis XIV, she demanded a black mass, and with it, an aphrodisiac to bind the king's heart to hers. But when the fickle monarch turned his attentions to the youthful Mademoiselle de Fontanges, flames of jealousy ignited within de Montespan, and she returned to La Voisin, her heart now set on a deadlier course: poison. Yet, in the labyrinthine politics of Versailles, where every smile masked a dagger, La Voisin's dark machinations could not remain hidden. The prefect of police, already entangled in the threads of a conspiracy to murder the king, soon uncovered the sinister web woven by La Voisin and her coven, a network of witches, poisoners, and purveyors of death who catered to the darkest desires of Parisian society. The scandal that followed shook the foundations of the Sun King's court. Whispers of murder, sorcery, and treason swirled like a plague through the gilded corridors. The investigation revealed the extent of La Voisin's crimes. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of lives extinguished by her hand or at her behest. And yet, even as the noose tightened, the king himself refused to believe that his beloved de Montespan could be involved, dismissing the accusations of La Voisin's own daughter as the ravings of a madwoman. The truth, though buried beneath layers of deceit and denial, was too dangerous to be acknowledged. Or to admit that Versailles, the very heart of France, was a den of sorcery and murderers would be to court rebellion. In the end, the fires of justice, or perhaps simply the fires of fear, claimed La Voisin and her accomplices. In 1680, she was consigned to the flames, her secrets lost to the smoke and ash that billowed into the Parisian sky. Yet, Even as the embers cooled, the shadows of her deeds lingered, a dark stain on the golden age of Louis XIV. 3. The Man in the Iron Mask. The tale of the Man in the Iron Mask, shrouded in the velvet folds of secrecy and the dust of forgotten dungeons, lingers like a shadow in the annals of France, wrapped in the cold embrace of mystery. In the era of Louis XIV, a prisoner, his face eternally veiled by a mask of somber black velvet, was condemned to a life of silence and darkness within the stony bowels of the Bastille. No mortal eye, save for those of his captors, beheld his visage, a face hidden from the world as if the very sight of it might unravel the fabric of the Sun King's realm. This enigmatic figure, who later flitted through the fevered imaginations of Voltaire and Alexandre Dumas, was given a name as murky as the man himself, Eustache d'Auger, a name whispered with uncertainty, as if it too was a mask. Was he truly a lowly valet, as some records suggest, or was this moniker but a smokescreen, obscuring a truth too dangerous to be revealed? The letters, decrees, the orders that bound d'Auger in chains spoke only of displeasure towards Louis, but what sin, what treason, had he committed to warrant such relentless imprisonment, where even a single uttered word might cost him his life? Entrusted to the merciless care of Benin d'Auvergne de Saint-Mars, a man who had become both jailer and spectre to this wretched soul, d'Auger was confined to a cell more fortress than prison, a tomb where 3 doors stood between him and the world. Not a whisper, not a breath, was to escape his lips save for the pleading of his base needs, while the silent corridors echoed with the weight of what could never be said. In time, the legends grew like ivy upon the stone, twisting and turning, fed by the fertile minds of Voltaire and Dumas, who dared to imagine that beneath that impenetrable mask lay the features of a royal brother, a twin who mirrored the king too closely, or perhaps a father whose very existence might have toppled the Sun King's golden throne. Others wove tales of an English nobleman, fallen general, or a duplicitous Italian count, each story more outlandish than the last, yet none able to pierce the veil of truth. Some even murmured that the man in the mask was no man at all, but a woman, born to Anne of Austria, hidden from the world and from history, a secret too perilous to expose. Yet the sober minds of historians, unswayed by the seductions of romance, would have it that d'Auger was nothing more than a servant, valet in truth and in deed, whose place among the imprisoned nobles was a quirk of fate rather than a mark of hidden nobility. No member of royalty, they argue, could ever have stooped to such menial duties, even in the darkest of prisons. But still, the question lingers in the shadows. Why the secrecy, the layers of silence, the iron will that kept d'Auger's face from the world? What truth lay buried within that cell, guarded by walls so thick that even the cries of despair could not penetrate? D'Auger died as he lived, phantom within the Bastille, his secret sealed with him in the cold earth of 1703. The mask, whether velvet or iron, remains unlifted, leaving us to wonder at the face it concealed, and the story that died with it. To the great cipher. In the labyrinthine corridors of Versailles, where whispers carried weight enough to topple thrones, there existed a cipher so impenetrable that it shrouded the secrets of Louis XIV in a cloak of near-perpetual darkness. Conceived by the enigmatic minds of Antoine and Bonaventure Rossignol, father and son entwined in the delicate art of cryptography, this great cipher served as the ironclad guardian of the Sun King's most clandestine plots. His schemes, veiled beneath a veil of numbers, danced and shifted like ghosts in the candlelight. So vital was this cipher to the lifeblood of the kingdom, that the Rossignols were granted chambers adjacent to the very heart of power, their fingers ever poised to weave the intricate webs of secrecy that would protect the throne. The room they occupied, shadowed and silent, save for the scratch of quills on parchment, became the nucleus of the Black Chamber, a place where knowledge was power and power was absolute. The true genius of the Rossignols lay not merely in the creation of a monoalphabetic cipher, for that would have been a trifle for lesser minds. No, their brilliance was in the infusion of a deceptive simplicity that belied a deeper complexity. The cipher they devised did not merely substitute one letter for another. It spoke in the tongues of syllables, a language of 587 numbers that encoded not letters, the very breath and cadence of speech itself. In this, they forged something unprecedented in the annals of cryptography, a cipher that mimicked the ebb and flow of the spoken word, a living thing that defied all attempts to unravel it. Yet, within this lattice of numbers, the Rossignols embedded traps, malignant digits that led would-be codebreakers down false trails, ensnaring them in a maze of meaningless figures. It was a cipher that mocked its adversaries, daring them to uncover its mysteries, only to cast them into the depths of despair as they realized the futility of their efforts. For over a century, the great cipher held firm, secrets locked away with the passing of the last Rossignol in 1811. It wasn't until the relentless persistence of cryptanalyst Etienne Bazaris, who spent 3 long years wrestling with the cipher's enigmas, that the first rays of understanding began to pierce the gloom. But even Bazaris, with all his skill, could only pry open a fraction of its secrets. Much of the cipher remains unsolved, a tantalizing whisper of hidden truths, a fragment of French history locked within the dusty tomes of the archives, waiting still for the day when it will finally surrender its hidden narrative. 1. The Lost Dauphin. In the bleak January of 1793, as the executioner's blade cleaved the knight in twain, the royalists, with a fervor born of desperation, proclaimed the tender Dauphin, Louis Charles, a mere 7 summers old, as King Louis XVII. The shadow of his father's fate hung heavy over him, and the child, now severed from his mother, the ill-fated Marie Antoinette, was thrust into the care of a cobbler, one Antoine Simon, a man whose rough hands were accustomed to leather, not the delicate shaping of a royal heir. Within the cobbler's grim domain, the young Louis was ensnared in a web of manipulation, the innocent tongue coerced into uttering vile accusations against his own mother, charges of molestation and incest, grotesque tapestry woven to hasten her demise beneath the guillotine's cruel kiss. The year of 1794 dawned, and with it the final severance of mother and child as the queen's head fell into the basket. Louis, now a motherless wraith, was ensnared within the cold, unyielding walls of the Temple prison in Paris, where the relentless passage of time and the cruelty of his captors gnawed away at his fragile body. By June 8, 1795, the light in his eyes had dimmed to nothing, and it was solemnly proclaimed that young Louis Charles had succumbed to the pale arms of death, tuberculosis being the harbinger of his end. Yet in the shadowy world of revolution and betrayal, even death was not final. Philippe Jean Pelletan, the doctor who presided over the boy's lifeless form, surreptitiously extracted the heart, as if hoping to preserve some fragment of the doomed prince's essence. Hidden away, the heart was steeped in alcohol, a relic swathed in secrecy that only deepened the suspicions surrounding the Dauphin's fate. Whispers grew like ivy on the walls of the temple, suggesting that the child who died was not Louis, but the rightful heir had been spirited away, his fate woven into the threads of conspiracy. In the years that followed, a procession of claimants emerged from the mists, each donning the ghostly mantle of the lost Dauphin. Among them, one figure loomed with particular insistence, a German clockmaker by the name of Karl Wilhelm Naundorff, who surfaced in Paris in 1833. His resemblance to the Bourbons, the deformity of his ear, the scar etched upon his lip, all these threads seemed to weave a tapestry of undeniable connection. Even the Dauphin's former governess, a relic of Versailles, swore by her old eyes that this was indeed the boy she had once known. Naundorff's tale found a fertile ground in the Netherlands, where the Dutch government, enraptured by the ghost of a monarchy long past, recognized him as Louis XVII. His tombstone, etched with the name Louis Charles de Bourbon, Duc de Normandie, seemed to seal his claim with the finality of death itself. But the dead do not rest easy in such tales, and the heart, Pelletan's stolen relic, was exhumed from the shadows in 1999, subjected to the cold gaze of science. In 2004, the mummified organ was declared a match to Marie Antoinette's bloodline, confirming, so it seemed, that the child Pelletan had obsessed was indeed the Dauphin. Yet doubt, like a specter, refuses to be banished. In 2014, another whisper of possibility emerged as DNA from Naundorf's humerus bones suggested a kinship to the ill-fated queen, reigniting the smoldering embers of the claim. Despite the uncertainties surrounding these tests, the enigma of Naundorf endures, hovering like a ghost at the edges of history. And what of the heart? Its tale is a labyrinthine one, fraught with mystery. King Louis XIV himself refused the organ, claiming it was not that of his nephew. The heart, it seemed, was a wanderer, passed from hand to hand, hidden, stolen, lost, and found again, only to be interred in the royal crypt at St. Denis in 1975. But even now, as it lies in its final resting place, doubts persist. Could it be the heart of some other member of the royal line, some other unfortunate child? France, with its restless spirit, believes the tale of the Dauphin to be concluded. The boy's fate sealed within the cold walls of the Temple prison. Yet for a few, the shadows of doubt refuse to lift. And the story of Louis Charles, like a tale half told, lingers on, unresolved, as though the ghosts of the past still wander the earth, searching for peace. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for more content. Also, don't forget to share this video with your friends. We appreciate your support. Bye.